The blood trickled from Lieutenant General Elise Daniels' split lip as the officer pressed his knee harder. She could end this instantly. One word about her rank would stop this. Instead, she locked eyes with the filming teenager and nodded almost imperceptibly. This moment would change everything. Before we dive deeper into this shocking confrontation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against injustice, and subscribe to follow Elise's incredible journey of courage and resilience. What would you do if faced with such a critical moment of choice? Let's continue to find out how this single decision altered countless lives. Lieutenant General Elise Daniels had not walked these streets in 15 years, yet Westridge, Georgia, felt hauntingly familiar as she turned the corner onto Magnolia Lane, where her mother still lived in the same modest two-story home. At 52, Elise carried herself with the quiet confidence earned through 3 decades of distinguished military service, her spine straight even in civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a simple navy blouse that revealed nothing of her status. As one of the highest-ranking black women in the United States Army, the summer heat pressed down as she approached her mother's mailbox, squinting at the collection of envelopes through designer sunglasses, a small concession to vanity after years of standard-issue everything. Officer Ryan Keller noticed her immediately from his patrol car, a white 12-year veteran of the Westridge Police Department, whose personnel file bulged with unreported excessive force complaints, all mysteriously vanished before reaching permanent records. "Ma'am," he called, exiting his vehicle with one hand resting on his holstered weapon. "What are you doing at that residence?" Elise turned calmly, professional courtesy automatic after years of command. "Checking my mother's mail, officer. She's been ill." Keller's stance shifted subtly, his weight forward, eyes narrowing. "You match a description we received. I'm going to need some identification." Elise raised an eyebrow, but reached slowly for her wallet, hyper-aware of how many interactions like this ended tragically. "Of course, Officer Keller," she replied, noting his nameplate as she handed over her driver's license showing her mother's address. Several neighbors had begun to gather on their porches, watching with the wary attention of people who had seen this scene before. Among them, 16-year-old Marcus Washington, who quietly removed his phone and began recording, his young face tense with recognition of what might unfold. Keller studied Elise's license with exaggerated scrutiny, then radioed for backup using coded language that suggested a potentially hostile subject. "This address says you live here, but Mrs. Daniels lives alone. Her daughter's been gone for years." Elise maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I'm that daughter visiting from Fort Benning. You can call my mother to confirm if necessary." Keller ignored her reasonable suggestion, his posture becoming increasingly aggressive. "What's in your pockets? Any weapons I should know about?" The gathering crowd grew larger, murmurs of concern spreading as Elise kept her hands visible. "No weapons, officer. May I ask what description I supposedly match? And your grounds for detention?" The question, calm, rational, but questioning, his authority, visibly triggered something in Keller. His face flushed red beneath his short-cropped blonde hair. "Turn around and put your hands against the vehicle. Now." Elise considered her options with the strategic assessment of someone who had commanded troops in 3 different combat zones. She could end this instantly. One phone call to the Pentagon, one mention of her rank, and this officer would be scrambling to apologize. Instead, she made a split-second decision whose consequences would ripple far beyond this moment. A choice to experience what countless other black citizens endured without the shield of rank. "Officer, I've identified myself and complied with your requests. Unless I'm being arrested, I'm free to go." Keller's hand shot out, gripping her arm with unnecessary force. "That's it. You're being detained for questioning." What happened next unfolded with sickening speed. Keller spun Elise around, slamming her against the patrol car with such force that her sunglasses skittered across the pavement. When she instinctively moved to protect herself, he escalated, immediately, taking her to the ground with a knee pressed between her shoulder blades. "Stop resisting," he shouted. Though she had offered no resistance beyond questioning his legal authority, the handcuffs bit into her wrists as he tightened. them several clicks beyond protocol cutting into her skin. Marcus captured everything. The way Keller's expression shifted from professional detachment to something uglier as he growled, "You people always think you know the law better than those enforcing it," the racial undertone unmistakable. Throughout the brutal takedown, Elise remained composed, her military training allowing her to endure the physical pain while making mental notes of every procedural violation. The backup Keller had called arrived minutes later, Officer Janet Wilson, who took in the scene with visible discomfort, her eyes flicking between the handcuffed woman on the ground, the gathering crowd, and Marcus's obvious recording. "What's the situation here?" Wilson asked, helping Elise to her feet with considerably more gentleness than her colleague had shown. Keller puffed his chest. "Suspicious person, possible burglar," became combative when questioned. The lie hung in the air, contradicted by multiple witnesses and video evidence, but Wilson didn't challenge her fellow officer publicly. Instead, she noticed the small trickle of blood from Elise's split lip, the awkward angle of the too tight handcuffs, and the dignified silence of the woman who, despite the humiliation, held herself with unusual poise. "We'll need to take you in for processing," Wilson said quietly, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. Elise had multiple opportunities during those tense minutes to reveal her identity, to watch the color drain from Keller's face as he realized he had just assaulted a lieutenant general in the United States Army. But a lifetime of strategic thinking had taught her that sometimes the most powerful move was patience, allowing an enemy to fully expose themselves before responding. So she remained silent about her rank, allowing herself to be placed in the back of the patrol car as neighbors protested and captured video. Just before the car door closed, Elise locked eyes with Marcus Washington, whose hands trembled slightly. As he continued recording, she gave him an almost imperceptible nod, acknowledgement, encouragement, and something else, determination. As the patrol car pulled away, Marcus looked down at his phone, the video already saving to his cloud account, his finger hovering over the upload button. In that moment, neither teenager nor general could fully grasp how this single interaction would unravel not just one officer's career, but an entire system built on protected abuse of power. The fluorescent lights of the Westridge police station buzzed overhead as Officer Keller roughly guided Elise through the booking process, his earlier aggression now tempered by the public setting, but still evident in his unnecessarily tight grip on her arm. "Name?" barked the booking officer, a heavy-set man who barely looked up from his computer. "Elise Marie Daniels," she replied calmly, still withholding her rank and position, her military ID securely hidden in an inner pocket Keller hadn't discovered during his cursory search. The fingerprinting process was familiar to Elise from processing detainees in military operations, though she had never expected to be on this side of the procedure in her own country. As her prints were scanned into the system, an alert immediately pinged on the computer screen, causing the booking officer's eyebrows to shoot up in surprise. He excused himself hurriedly, prints in hand, disappearing into an office marked Captain Thomas Reynolds. Inside the office, Captain Reynolds, a 45-year-old veteran officer with political aspirations, stared in disbelief at the computer screen displaying Elise's military record alongside her booking information. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "You're telling me Officer Keller just arrested a lieutenant general?" The booking officer nodded grimly. 3-star. Current assignment, Pentagon Strategic Operations, combat decorations from Iraq and Afghanistan, presidential commendation for her work restructuring military response protocols. Reynolds's mind raced through the potential fallout, media coverage, Pentagon involvement, career-ending repercussions. He grabbed his jacket and rushed to the holding area, where Elise sat perfectly still on a metal bench, her posture military straight, despite the handcuffs still cutting into her wrists. "General Daniels," Reynolds began in a hushed, urgent tone, after dismissing the guard, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I've ordered your immediate release and would like to personally apologize for Officer Keller's conduct." Elise regarded him with calm assessment, the same look she had given foreign dignitaries across negotiation tables. "Has my processing been completed, Captain Reynolds?" The question caught him off guard. "Well, no, but given your position, we'll bypass standard procedures and—" Elise interrupted him with quiet authority. "I decline any special treatment." "Captain, I request the same processing as any other citizen subjected to arrest in your jurisdiction." Reynolds blinked in confusion. "General, I don't think you understand the situation. We can handle this discreetly, ensure Officer Keller is appropriately disciplined internally, and avoid any unnecessary attention." A slight smile crossed Elise's face, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I understand the situation perfectly, Captain. Perhaps better than you do." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Washington sat in his family's living room, his mother Lisa standing behind him as they watched the view count on his uploaded video climb rapidly. 5,000 views already," Lisa whispered, her hand tight on her son's shoulder. "You did the right thing, but are you ready for what comes next?" Marcus nodded solemnly, reading the outraged comments flooding in as local community members recognized both Elise and Officer Keller. Within hours, the Westridge Police Department's phone lines were jammed with calls demanding information about the black woman assaulted for checking her own mother's mail. Captain Reynolds, increasingly desperate to contain the situation, called an emergency meeting with Chief Monroe and Mayor Wilson, while simultaneously issuing a standard press release announcing Officer Keller had been placed on paid administrative leave pending investigation, a response that only fueled public outrage when it was shared alongside Marcus's video. Keller himself showed little concern, lounging in the break room and telling fellow officers, "It'll blow over like it always does, 2 weeks paid vacation, then back to normal." He had no idea that his face was already being shared across social media platforms, his name becoming synonymous with police brutality in rapidly expanding circles beyond Westridge. By evening, Elise had been processed and released on her own recognizance, charges of resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, filed despite the video evidence contradicting both. She declined comment to the local reporters already gathering outside the station, instead making a single phone call to Naomi Jenkins, her childhood friend who had become one of Georgia's most respected civil rights attorneys. They met at Naomi's office, a converted Victorian house downtown, where Elise finally allowed herself to press a cold compress to her swollen lip. "You could have stopped it with one word," Naomi said, shaking her head as she reviewed the charges. "The system protects itself unless you force transparency," Elise replied, her voice carrying the weight of deep conviction. "This happens every day to people without my resources or connections. The difference is, I can make sure the outcome changes this time." Naomi studied her old friend with newfound respect. "You planned this, from the moment he approached you." Elise neither confirmed nor denied, simply stating, "I made a tactical decision to experience the system as an ordinary citizen would. The evidence speaks for itself." As their strategy session continued into the night, national news outlets began picking up Marcus's video, though Elise's identity remained protected for now, described only as a dignified black woman in most reports. Speculation ran wild online, with some recognizing her unusual composure under pressure, wondering about her background. West Point graduate and former military appeared in comment sections, getting warmer, but still missing the full significance of who Officer Keller had assaulted. Just before midnight, Elise visited her mother's home where 75-year-old Beatrice Daniels waited up, despite her health concerns, her face lined with worry as she embraced her daughter. "You could have been killed," she whispered, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "All these years I've worried about losing you overseas. Never thought it would be the police in our own neighborhood." Elise held her mother's trembling hands. "I'm okay, Mama, and this is the beginning of something necessary." Outside, news vans had already begun to park along Magnolia Lane, reporters hoping to identify and interview the woman from the viral video, unaware that inside the modest 2-story home, a lieutenant general was setting in motion a campaign more strategically sophisticated than many military operations she had commanded, one that would ultimately expose not just a single officer's misconduct, but an entire infrastructure of protected corruption. Within 48 hours, Marcus Washington's video had amassed over 5 million views across multiple platforms. The raw footage of Officer Keller's assault on Elise sparking outrage that transcended Westridge's city limits and captured national attention. Major news networks ran the clip on repeat, each viewing further solidifying public perception of an unjustified attack on a composed black woman whose identity remained intriguingly undisclosed despite frenzied speculation. "Who is she?" became the trending question online, with internet sleuths analyzing her posture, her controlled responses, and the strategic patience she displayed throughout the ordeal. CNN's anchor noted, "Sources tell us several high-ranking military officials have viewed this footage with particular interest, though the Pentagon has declined official comment." Outside the Westridge Police Department headquarters, a hastily organized press conference featured Police Chief Walter Monroe, a 60-year-old career officer whose jowly face appeared strained beneath the harsh sunlight as cameras crowded the steps. "The Westridge Police Department takes any allegation of misconduct seriously," he intoned, reading from prepared remarks. "Officer Keller has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a thorough investigation. We ask the public to reserve judgment until all facts are known." The assembled reporters shouted questions about excessive force policies and racial profiling statistics, which Monroe deflected with practiced evasions about ongoing investigations and personnel matters. What the cameras couldn't capture was the emergency meeting that had preceded this performance, where Monroe had slammed his fist on the conference table and growled to his command staff, "Find something on this woman. Anything. Traffic tickets. Noise complaints, bad credit. I want leverage." Yesterday, across town, community organizer Keisha Taylor had transformed the local community center into an operation headquarters, coordinating protesters who now numbered in the hundreds outside the police station. At 35, Keisha had spent over a decade documenting cases of police misconduct in Westridge, building relationships with affected families, and fighting for accountability that rarely materialized. "This time is different," she told volunteers as they prepared signs and water stations for demonstrators in the Georgia heat. "This time, we have irrefutable evidence and a victim they can't easily discredit." What Keisha couldn't know was how truly different this case would prove to be, or the identity of the soft-spoken woman who had called to thank her for organizing community support. The carefully constructed facade protecting Officer Keller began crumbling when an anonymous source within the department leaked his personnel file to 3 different news outlets simultaneously. The redacted documents revealed 7 previous excessive force complaints, all filed by black residents, all mysteriously resolved without disciplinary action. Online researchers quickly located and interviewed 4 of these previous victims, whose stories created a damning pattern of targeted harassment and escalation. Do you believe departments should be required to maintain public records of officer complaints? Comment number 1, if you think transparency saves lives, or number 2, if you think it unfairly targets police. Hit subscribe if you want to see justice served in cases like Elise's, and like this video to support accountability in law enforcement. How many other officers like Keller are protected by a system designed to hide their misconduct? In the oak-paneled office of Mayor Sandra Wilson, a closed-door meeting with Chief Monroe revealed the political calculations already underway. Wilson, an ambitious 55-year-old who had her sights set on state office, paced behind her. "Desk, this needs to disappear, Walter. Offer her money, a public apology, whatever it takes." Monroe's expression darkened. "She's not taking my calls. Her attorney says she's pursuing criminal charges against Keller." The mayor stopped pacing. "Then find officers willing to contradict the video. There must be something about her behavior we can use." What neither realized was that their conversation was being noted in exact detail by Mayor Wilson's assistant, whose brother had been among Keller's previous victims. Elise, meanwhile, arranged a meeting with Marcus and his mother Lisa at their modest apartment, arriving without fanfare in an unmarked car, driven by a former military colleague now working private security. "Thank you," Elise said simply, clasping Marcus's hand between both of hers. "Your courage that day may save countless others from similar treatment." The teenager straightened under her gaze. "I was scared he might shoot you," he admitted. "The way he was escalating so fast." Lisa Washington, a 42-year-old hospital administrator, studied Elise with growing recognition. "You're military, aren't you? The way you handled yourself." Elise smiled, but neither confirmed nor denied, redirecting the conversation. "What matters is that your son captured the truth. That's an act of citizenship as powerful as any I've seen." As Elise departed, promising ongoing support should the family face repercussions, Lisa turned to her son. "That woman commands rooms," without even trying. "I'd bet my paycheck she's used to giving orders, not taking them." The first concrete hints of deeper corruption emerged when an investigative journalist obtained text messages between Chief Monroe and Mayor Wilson, discussing how to silence 3 officers who had expressed concerns about department practices. "Remind Johnson about his pension," read one message from Monroe. "Tell Martinez her probation extension is still under review," suggested another. The pattern revealed a leadership structure that routinely suppressed internal dissent through intimidation and career threats. Pentagon officials, meanwhile, had identified Elise within hours of the video's release, creating a crisis management team to address potential fallout. Colonel James Harper, Elise's direct report, contacted her privately. "General, the Joint. Chiefs are concerned about how this might impact ongoing operations and department morale. They're suggesting a private resolution might be best for all parties." Elise's response was measured but firm. "Please inform them that I'm handling this as a private citizen, not as an officer. My actions reflect my personal experience, not department policy." Harper's discomfort was palpable even through the phone. "They're concerned about optics, ma'am." Elise allowed a rare edge to enter her voice. "I'm concerned about justice, Colonel, far more important than optics." Rather than immediately pursuing federal civil rights charges that might trigger military involvement, Elise made the strategic decision to file straightforward assault charges against Officer Keller through local courts, keeping the case firmly within civilian jurisdiction while her military identity remained protected. The evening concluded with Elise addressing a small gathering at Westridge's First Baptist Church, where historically the black community had organized during the civil rights movement. Without revealing her rank, she spoke with quiet authority about systemic injustice. "What happened to me isn't unique or special," she told the rapt audience. "What's unique is having indisputable evidence and the resources to fight back. I intend to use those advantages not just for my case, but to create lasting change in how policing happens in this community." As attendees nodded and murmured agreement, few realized they were witnessing not just a victim speaking out, but a military strategist implementing the first phase of a campaign planned with the same precision she had once used to coordinate multinational military operations in conflict zones around the world. The coordinated counterattack began at dawn on the 5th day after the incident, when 3 local news stations simultaneously ran exclusive segments questioning Elise's character. Sources close to the investigation had mysteriously provided reporters with a 10-year-old speeding ticket from Virginia and grainy security footage of Elise in what appeared to be a heated argument with a store clerk 3 years prior. The desperate attempts to discredit her were transparent to many viewers, especially when contrasted with Officer Keller's softball exclusive interview on WRTG-6, where he sat in civilian clothes, voice trembling with manufactured emotion as, he explained, "In that moment I genuinely feared for my safety. Her posture, her refusal to comply with simple commands, these are warning signs we're trained to recognize." The interview carefully avoided mentioning the video evidence contradicting his claims, focusing instead on his 19-month-old daughter and his commitment to protecting the community. Elise watched the interview from her mother's living room, making notes with the same analytical precision she brought to military intelligence briefings, while outside, Beatrice Daniels's carefully tended rose bushes had been trampled and her front door spray-painted with racial slurs sometime during the night. When Beatrice called the police to report the vandalism, the dispatcher promised officers would respond as soon as units become available. They arrived 7 hours later, took minimal notes, and filed a report that classified the incident as possible teenage prank, despite the obviously targeted nature. The psychological pressure tactics extended beyond Elise to those supporting her cause. Marcus Washington returned from school to find his locker vandalized, while his mother, Lisa, received an anonymous call suggesting her hospital performance review might be negatively impacted by her public activities. Naomi Jenkins arrived at her law office to discover broken windows and client files scattered across the parking lot. The investigating officer, casually suggesting it could have been random, might want to consider better security. These coordinated intimidation attempts might have worked against less resourceful opponents, but they severely underestimated the strategic mind they faced. For every action against her, Elise had anticipated and prepared 3 potential responses, drawing on decades of tactical planning experience. When young officer Jessica Martinez appeared at Naomi's newly repaired office after hours, nervously glancing over her shoulder before entering, the attorney was ready with a secure recording device and witness present. "I can't be seen talking to you," Martinez whispered, her 29-year-old face lined with stress beyond her years. But what happened to General Daniels isn't isolated. There's a pattern, documented in reports that never make it to official records. She slid a flash drive across the desk with trembling fingers. Weekly quota meetings, where officers are pressured to increase arrests in specific neighborhoods, performance evaluations that reward proactive policing in minority areas, training, sessions where they tell us which judges will accept flimsy probable cause statements. The flash drive contained evidence more damning than even Naomi had expected: internal emails, meeting minutes, and unofficial department policies that revealed systematic targeting of black neighborhoods for enhanced enforcement. While Elise methodically built her case, she faced unexpected pressure from military colleagues struggling with how to respond to her situation. Several had recognized her immediately in the video, but Pentagon protocols for supporting service members facing discrimination contained no playbook for a lieutenant general choosing to conceal her rank while pursuing justice. General Richardson, Elise's direct superior and longtime mentor, requested a private meeting at a secure location outside Westridge. At 58, Richardson had navigated military politics for decades, his weathered face reflecting both concern and calculation as they sat in a nondescript hotel conference room. "Elise, I understand your principles here, but the Joint Chiefs are concerned about political implications. Senator Hargrove is already asking questions about military personnel engaging in local activism." Elise maintained perfect posture in her civilian clothes, her expression unreadable. "With respect, sir, this isn't activism. It's citizenship. I experienced criminal assault by a police officer, and am pursuing legal remedies as is my right." Richardson sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped grey hair. "The Pentagon PR team is concerned about optics. They're suggesting a private resolution might be best for all parties involved." Elise's response was measured but resolute. "This isn't about my rank, sir. It's about exposing what happens when there is none. How many other black citizens face this treatment without the resources to fight back?" The pressure escalated when investigation revealed connections between Westridge's aggressive policing policies and lucrative construction contracts. Mayor Wilson's husband sat on the board of Westridge Development Corporation, which consistently won bids to build new police facilities and renovate properties seized through civil asset forfeiture, properties disproportionately taken from Black and Latino residents. The financial incentives behind targeted enforcement became increasingly clear as investigative journalists followed money trails from police budget allocations to private contractors with connections to city leadership. As public pressure mounted, Elise received an unexpected call from the mayor's office, not with apologies but with an offer. $500,000, sealed records, and a private letter of apology from Officer Keller, proposed the city attorney, voice smooth with practiced negotiation. "All we require is a standard non-disclosure agreement." Elise's refusal was immediate and unequivocal. "I'm not interested in private settlements that allow systemic problems to continue. This isn't about money." The city attorney's tone chilled. "General Daniels, yes, we know who you are. Consider your position and career carefully before rejecting a reasonable offer. The implicit threat hung in the air, but Elise had faced down warlords and hostile foreign officials with the same calm she now directed at the attorney. I've considered my position with great care. Have you considered yours? Attempting to silence a victim of police brutality through financial coercion could be interpreted as obstruction of justice. The pressure reached a breaking point when Elise returned from a strategy meeting with Naomi to find her mother's home unusually quiet. After checking Beatrice's bedroom and finding it empty, she conducted a security sweep of the house, her military training guiding her systematic search until she discovered a small electronic device hidden behind a family photograph. The surveillance equipment was military-grade, far beyond standard police department resources, suggesting either federal involvement or private contractors. Elise photographed but did not remove the device, then called a secure line to her trusted security team. Within an hour, they had located Beatrice, who had been invited to the police station to clarify some details about her vandalism report. The elderly woman sat frightened but dignified in an interrogation room, having refused to answer questions without her daughter or an attorney present. When Elise arrived with Naomi, the officers quickly changed their approach, claiming the extended interview was standard procedure and apologizing for any miscommunication about notification. As they left the station, Beatrice gripped her daughter's hand with surprising strength. "They're scared of you," she observed with the wisdom of someone who had lived through the civil rights era. "Not because of your rank, but because you won't be intimidated." Elise nodded, mentally calculating the escalation of tactics and what it revealed about her opponent's increasing desperation. The surveillance equipment, the attempted intimidation of her mother, the coordinated media campaign, these weren't the actions of a department confident in its position, but rather the flailing of a corrupt system beginning to recognize the truly formidable opponent it faced. Elise awakened before dawn the next morning, the habits of military discipline persisting through decades of service. She sat at her mother's kitchen table, yellow legal pad before her, mapping out the next phase of response with the same methodical approach she had once used to plan multinational military operations. Where others might have seen only obstacles in the coordinated campaign against her, Elise recognized vulnerabilities to exploit and leverage points to press. By sunrise, she had developed a comprehensive strategy that would transform her individual case into a systemic challenge too broad to suppress. First, she activated a network of military contacts who owed her no official allegiance but tremendous personal respect. Retired Colonel Diane Harris, now heading a national civil rights organization's legal division, arrived in Westridge by noon, bringing resources, expertise, and national media connections that transformed the scope of response overnight. "This isn't just about one incident anymore," Harris told assembled community leaders at a strategy session hosted in Naomi's office. "This is about establishing accountability mechanisms that survive beyond individual cases." Across town, Officer Jessica Martinez spent her day off meticulously documenting years of departmental racial profiling policies, her hands shaking as she copied files she had been instructed to delete during a suspicious records maintenance initiative the previous year. The young officer had joined the force with genuine desire to serve her community, only to find herself increasingly complicit in practices that targeted residents based on race rather than behavior. "There's a weekly quota meeting where they never use the word quota," she explained to Naomi during their second confidential meeting. "Instead, they talk about performance metrics and proactive enforcement zones, all code for targeting black neighborhoods with pretextual stops." The documentation she provided created a comprehensive paper trail revealing how departmental policies systematically violated constitutional protections while maintaining plausible deniability. The timing proved perfect for Elise's carefully planned next move, authorizing Naomi to reveal her identity in a controlled press release distributed to select national outlets simultaneously. The revelation that Officer Keller had assaulted not just any citizen, but a lieutenant general with 30 years of decorated service created the seismic shift in narrative Elise had anticipated. Pentagon phones rang continuously as reporters sought comment on how the military would respond to one of its highest-ranking officers being subjected to police brutality. Military forums exploded with outrage from service members across political spectrums, the shared identity of military service temporarily bridging partisan divides. If a three-star general faces this treatment in civilian clothes, what chance does an ordinary citizen have? Became the rallying question across social media platforms. Officer Keller's past received renewed scrutiny as journalists uncovered his military service record, including a less-than-honorable discharge from the Army following misconduct allegations that had been sealed as part of his separation agreement. Further investigation revealed domestic violence complaints filed by two former partners, both withdrawn after alleged intimidation, creating a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond his professional misconduct. As Keller's history emerged, Mayor Wilson scrambled to distance herself, scheduling a hastily arranged ceremony where she intended to present Elise with ceremonial keys to the city, a transparent attempt at damage control that Elise declined. With polite firmness, "I appreciate the gesture," her formal response read, "but would prefer the city focus resources on meaningful policy reforms rather than symbolic recognition." The rejection stung Wilson, whose political consultants had already drafted campaign materials featuring photos of the planned ceremony. The mayor's frustration boiled over during a planning meeting with Chief Monroe when she believed microphones had been turned off. "This goddamn woman won't take the olive branch," she muttered, unaware that the system remained live to attendees joining virtually. "Does she think she's too good to accept the city's apology because she's—" Monroe finished her thought with a racial slur that instantly circulated among meeting participants, one of whom recorded the exchange on a personal device. Within hours, both Wilson and Monroe faced demands for resignation from community leaders and elected officials who had previously remained silent on the controversy. While public attention focused on these dramatic developments, Elise worked methodically behind the scenes, building a coalition that crossed racial, political, and institutional boundaries. When the police union president attempted to frame the issue as anti-police activism, Elise invited him to meet privately with black veterans from every branch of service, creating dialogue that shifted the narrative from accusations to solutions. The military community's response proved especially interesting, revealing deep divisions between those who viewed Elise's actions as politicizing her position and others who saw her as upholding her oath to defend the Constitution. Several retired generals wrote op-eds supporting her right to pursue justice, while others privately suggested she was damaging military-civilian relations. Pentagon officials held emergency meetings about public relations strategy, eventually issuing a carefully worded statement acknowledging General Daniels's right to pursue remedies as a private citizen, while emphasizing that her actions were not undertaken in her official capacity. What truly transformed the case from individual incident to class action was Naomi's legal strategy, developed in partnership with Elise's tactical planning expertise. Rather than pursuing only charges against Keller, they filed a comprehensive lawsuit on behalf of 12 identified victims of similar treatment by the Westridge Police Department, with Elise as lead plaintiff. The filing included affidavits from Officer Martinez and two other department employees who had come forward after seeing Elise's example, creating an unprecedented crack in the blue wall of silence. The lawsuit methodically documented how department policies created incentives for discriminatory policing, how complaint mechanisms systematically failed, and how city leadership maintained plausible deniability while benefiting from aggressive enforcement in minority neighborhoods. Public response manifested most visibly in growing protests outside police headquarters, where participants adopted a silent salute gesture inspired by Elise's military background, right hand over heart, then extended forward with palm up, symbolizing the offering of dignity and demanding of accountability. The gesture spread rapidly through social media, with participants from across the country posting photos with the hashtag "when saluting in silence," creating a nationwide visual representation of solidarity that transcended geographic boundaries. The movement's growing momentum created unprecedented pressure on Westridge's leadership structure. but also made Elise an increasingly significant target. Security experts noted suspicious vehicles conducting surveillance on her mother's home, intercepted threats on dark web forums, and identified multiple attempts to access her military records through unauthorized channels. What her opponents failed to understand was that Elise had spent decades analyzing threat profiles in conflict zones worldwide. Their intimidation tactics were not only ineffective, but provided actionable intelligence about their methods and resources. When Keller appeared at a public hearing surrounded by supporters, wearing matching T-shirts with "Back the Blue" slogans, Elise noted the organized nature of the group and tasked her security team with identifying connections. The investigation revealed links to 3 private security contractors with military backgrounds, suggesting resources beyond a patrol officer's personal network. Each attempted intimidation only revealed more of the opposition's structure, allowing Elise to map the corruption network with increasing precision while maintaining the strategic patience that had defined her military career. "They expect an emotional response," she explained to Naomi during a secure strategy session. "Every time we respond with calculated precision instead, it undermines their playbook." The transformation from local incident to national movement reached critical mass exactly 17 days after Officer Keller assaulted Elise on Magnolia Lane. Presidential candidates facing questions during campaign stops could no longer deflect, with vague statements about ongoing investigations as reporters demanded specific positions on police accountability legislation. Congressional representatives with police unions among their largest donors found themselves navigating increasingly uncomfortable terrain between donor expectations and constituent demands. Westridge became the focal point for a national conversation, with media crews establishing semi-permanent encampments outside City Hall, the police department, and the courthouse where proceedings against Officer Keller were scheduled to begin. Investigative journalists uncovered a pattern that extended far beyond Westridge's city limits. A multi-state network of police departments that routinely hired officers discharged from other jurisdictions for misconduct, creating a revolving door that kept problematic officers employed regardless of their histories. Records revealed Officer Keller had served in 3 departments across 2 states before landing in Westridge, each transition following complaints that mysteriously disappeared from his record. "The system isn't broken," commented one police accountability expert on national television. "It's functioning exactly as designed, to protect itself at the expense of the public it claims to serve." The first public hearing drew unprecedented attendance, with overflow crowds watching on screens set up outside the courthouse. Elise arrived in civilian business attire, her military bearing evident in her posture, but her uniform deliberately absent as she maintained her stance of pursuing justice as a citizen rather than leveraging her rank. Under oath, she described the assault in precise, powerful language that left no room for misinterpretation. Her training in mission debriefings evident in her ability to recount exact sequences of events without emotional embellishment, yet with compelling clarity. Officer Keller escalated from verbal questioning to physical assault within 90 seconds of initial contact, she testified. "At no point did I resist, threaten, or act in any manner that would justify the force used against me." He stated explicitly, and I quote, "You people always think you know the law better than those enforcing it," making clear the racial motivation behind his actions. The gallery remained silent during her testimony, the only sound the furious scratching of reporters' pens and the occasional camera shutter. Officer Keller attempted intimidation by appearing at the hearing with a contingent of uniformed officers and police union representatives, positioning themselves directly in Elise's line of sight. The tactic might have worked against less experienced opponents, but Elise had stared down warlords across negotiation tables in combat zones. A row of glaring officers barely registered as she delivered testimony with unwavering focus. Have you ever witnessed someone maintaining complete composure under pressure? Comment number 1, if you've seen this kind of remarkable self-control in action, or number 2, if you believe you'd be able to stay as calm as Elise in similar circumstances. Like this video if you're inspired by individuals who stand their ground against intimidation, and subscribe to follow this extraordinary story of courage against systemic injustice. What would you do if faced with the kind of retaliation that comes next in this unfolding battle? As Elise's case gained momentum, those supporting her faced escalating repercussions. Marcus Washington discovered himself suddenly targeted by school resource officers who claimed an anonymous tip about drugs in his locker. The search yielded nothing, but the 16-year-old found himself subjected to random checks and increased scrutiny that disrupted his education and threatened his scholarship prospects. When Elise learned of this development, she activated contacts from her extensive military network, arranging for a retired JAG officer to represent Marcus pro bono, and documenting the pattern of harassment that revealed a direct connection to his role in recording her assault. Within 48 hours, the school resource officers were reassigned, and the principal received a letter from the Department of Education inquiring about potential civil rights violations in the school's disciplinary practices. The incident highlighted a secondary aspect of systemic injustice that Elise incorporated into her expanding strategy: the school-to-prison pipeline that disproportionately pushed black students into the criminal justice system through zero-tolerance policies and heightened surveillance. Mayor Wilson, increasingly desperate to contain the growing scandal, was recorded during a private fundraising dinner discussing the allocation of city resources to monitor and disrupt protest activities. "We need to identify the troublemakers and make examples," she told wealthy donors between sips of champagne, unaware that a catering staff member sympathetic to Elise's cause was recording the conversation. "This general might have Pentagon connections, but we have our own resources to protect the city's interests." The recording, strategically leaked to multiple news outlets simultaneously, contradicted Wilson's public statements about supporting peaceful expression of community concerns and revealed the extent to which city leadership viewed constituents as adversaries rather than stakeholders. Elise anticipated that her opponents would attempt to control the narrative through selective information release, so she implemented a counter-strategy of simultaneous disclosure to multiple outlets, preventing any single news source from framing the story to protect institutional interests. Evidence of departmental corruption reached reporters at 5 different publications on the same morning, each receiving distinct but complementary documentation that, when assembled, revealed the comprehensive nature of Westridge's systemic problems. The social media campaign supporting Elise evolved organically beyond her direct involvement, with the hashtag #Saluting in Silence inspiring thousands to share their own experiences of injustice alongside silent video testimonials. The gesture's military origins resonated particularly strongly among veterans, creating uncomfortable divisions within police departments where many officers had military backgrounds and felt torn between professional loyalty and respect for Elise's rank and service record. As the movement grew, so did counter-protests organized by police unions and conservative political groups, their increasing hostility and explicit threats creating security concerns that Elise addressed with characteristic thoroughness. Without official announcement, several junior officers who had served under her command arrived in Westridge on leave, establishing an unofficial security presence around key locations, including Beatrice Daniels' home and Naomi's law office. Their military training was evident in their coordinated coverage and communication protocols, creating a protective network that operated just below the threshold of official intervention. The complexity of the case drew federal attention, with FBI agents arriving in Westridge to investigate potential civil rights violations and patterns of misconduct within the department. Chief Monroe publicly welcomed the federal presence while privately instructing officers to minimize cooperation and carefully curate any records provided. What he couldn't control was the growing number of officers following Martinez's example and coming forward with their own documentation of departmental practices, creating an unprecedented breach in the code of silence that had protected misconduct for decades. The widening investigation revealed connections between aggressive policing patterns and property development interests, with civil asset forfeiture providing properties that were then redeveloped using companies connected to city leadership. These financial incentives helped explain why certain neighborhoods faced disproportionate enforcement. The pattern maximized properties available for seizure and subsequent profitable redevelopment. As these revelations dominated headlines, Officer Keller became increasingly unstable, his behavior erratic during mandatory psychological evaluations and his social media posts reflecting growing paranoia. The department attempted to distance itself from him, portraying him as one bad apple rather than a predictable product of institutional culture. The strategy collapsed when records revealed that Keller had led rookie training sessions on proactive enforcement for 3 consecutive years, directly shaping departmental practices with leadership approval. The expanding scope of revelations created mounting pressure on all sides, culminating in a critical moment 17 days into the movement. As Elise left a community meeting discussing police reform proposals, a black SUV with tinted windows accelerated toward her. The attempted assault was thwarted only by the quick action of her unofficial security team, who intercepted the vehicle before it reached her. The driver escaped in the ensuing chaos, but investigation revealed connections to a private security firm contracted by investors with significant financial interests in Westridge's development projects. The assassination attempt changed the calculus for everyone involved, transforming a local accountability effort into a potential murder investigation with federal jurisdiction. For Elise, it represented the opponent's most desperate move and the clearest indication that her strategy was working exactly as planned. The antiseptic smell of hospital disinfectant filled Elise's nostrils as she regained consciousness, the steady beep of monitoring equipment establishing a rhythm that matched the throbbing pain in her shoulder where flying glass had cut deep during the attack. The assassination attempt had failed in its primary objective, but succeeded in physically injuring her for the first time since this campaign began. As her vision cleared, she recognized Naomi dozing in the visitor's chair, legal papers spread across her lap even in exhaustion. Elise's slight movement awakened her friend, who leaned forward with visible relief. "The doctors say you were lucky. 2 inches to the left and the artery would have been severed." Elise's military experience with injuries provided perspective. Not luck, training. I turned away from the impact instinctively. The physical pain, however manageable through discipline and medication, represented only the surface layer of what this fight was costing her. As Elise lay in the hospital bed, memories surfaced from decades of navigating racism within military structures. The commander who had expressed surprise at her test scores during officer training, suggesting perhaps there had been a special accommodation. The passed-over promotion that mysteriously materialized after she filed a formal inquiry. The constant requirement to be twice as prepared, twice as composed, twice as perfect as her white counterparts to receive equal recognition. She had spent 30 years fighting those battles silently within the system, using the chain of command and carefully documented excellence to advance, despite institutional resistance. This new battlefield had different rules, but the underlying dynamics remained painfully familiar. Elise's mother, Beatrice, visited daily, her own health visibly deteriorating under the stress of recent events. At 75, with controlled hypertension and early signs of heart failure, Beatrice should have been avoiding stress rather than finding police surveillance equipment in her home and watching her daughter fight a system that had terrorized black communities for generations. "I never wanted this for you," Beatrice confessed during one visit, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she adjusted Elise's pillows with maternal persistence, despite her daughter's reassurances that hospital staff handled such tasks. "All those years worrying about you in war zones, and now this happens 3 blocks from where you grew up." Elise covered her mother's hand with her own. "The difference, Mama, is that this time I chose the battlefield knowing exactly what it would cost." The wider circle of allies faced their own consequences for supporting her cause. Officer Jessica Martinez had been terminated after her probationary status was retroactively extended through administrative manipulation, the official reason listed as failure to meet performance standards, despite her exemplary record. Department leadership had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign to discredit her, planting evidence of procedural violations and falsifying supervision reports. Martinez now faced not only unemployment, but professional blacklisting that would prevent her from working in law enforcement anywhere in the region. Her commitment to truth-telling, destroying the career she had worked toward since childhood. Naomi's professional and personal life came under systematic attack, with anonymous complaints filed against her with the State Bar Association and client files stolen during the office break-in, mysteriously appearing in opposing counsel's possession during unrelated cases. The pattern of harassment extended to her home, where vandalism occurred with such frequency that her insurance company threatened to cancel her policy, citing excessive claims. The calculated pressure extended to Marcus Washington and his family, who had been forced to temporarily relocate after repeated threats escalated to a brick, thrown through their apartment window with a note reading, "Race traitors die." Despite protective measures implemented by Elise's unofficial security team, the psychological toll on the 16-year-old manifested in dropping grades and withdrawal from the extracurricular activities that had positioned him for college scholarships. Lisa Washington took unpaid leave from the hospital to support her son, creating financial strain that compounded their stress despite the legal defense fund established to assist those affected by involvement in the case. The widening circles of consequences reached even into military spheres, where Elise's superiors delivered an ultimatum during a video conference conducted from her hospital room. General Richardson's face filled the secure tablet screen, his expression grave. "Elise, the Joint Chiefs have authorized me to present two options. You can honorably retire immediately with full benefits and the thanks of a grateful nation, or you can continue this personal campaign and face reassignment to administrative duties pending review of your security clearance and command fitness." The subtext was unmistakable. Continued pursuit of justice would end her military career, regardless of its 3 decades of distinguished service. Elise received the news with the same composure she had maintained throughout this ordeal, though those who knew her best would have recognized the slight tightening around her eyes that signaled controlled anger. "I'll need 24 hours to consider my response, sir." After Richardson's image disappeared from the screen, Elise faced the most difficult strategic calculation of this entire campaign. The question wasn't whether justice for one incident was worth sacrificing her career. That decision had been made the moment she chose silence about her rank during Keller's assault. The real question was whether stepping back now would protect or abandon those who had risked everything to stand with her. Officer Martinez had lost her job, Naomi's practice was under attack, Marcus and his mother lived in temporary housing with uncertain futures, and countless others had stepped forward with their own stories, trusting Elise's leadership to create meaningful change rather than symbolic gestures. Beyond individual consequences, Elise confronted disturbing evidence of coordination between local authorities and private interests, with connections reaching into state and possibly federal levels. The surveillance equipment found in her mother's home exceeded standard police department resources, suggesting either federal involvement or private contractors with significant technical capabilities. The attempted assassination demonstrated escalation to potentially lethal tactics, indicating opponents who viewed her elimination as an acceptable risk. Most troublingly, financial records uncovered by investigative journalists revealed Officer Keller's connections to a local white supremacist group that provided him protection and support following his suspension, their communications suggesting operational links to similar organizations in multiple states. As night fell outside her hospital window, Elise received an encrypted message from a military intelligence contact still actively supporting her cause, despite official pressure to distance themselves. The information confirmed her suspicions about coordinated efforts to destroy evidence. Chief Monroe and Mayor Wilson had initiated an emergency records digitization project that provided cover for selectively purging documentation of departmental misconduct, while simultaneously creating back-channel communications with state officials about potential immunity agreements in exchange for containing the scandal within Westridge's borders. The systematic attempt to limit damage rather than address root causes crystallized Elise's decision. By morning, she had developed a comprehensive strategy that would utilize her military authority one final time, despite the personal consequences. When General Richardson reconnected for her answer, expecting capitulation to protect her pension and legacy, Elise's response shocked even those who had witnessed her legendary resolve throughout multiple combat deployments. "Sir, I respectfully decline both options. Instead, I request emergency leave effective immediately, with the understanding that I will appear on national television tomorrow morning. I wanted you to hear directly from me that I will be wearing my full dress uniform and speaking as lieutenant." General Elise Daniels about systemic injustice I have personally experienced. Richardson's face registered genuine alarm. "Elise, reconsider. 30 years of service, your pension, your place in military history." She interrupted with uncharacteristic directness. "With respect, sir, what good is history if we fail to change it when given the opportunity? I've devoted my life to defending American ideals. I won't abandon that mission now when it's most needed." After ending the call, Elise began methodical preparation for the most significant briefing of her career. Not to military or political leadership, but to the American public about failures in the systems they trusted to protect them. The uniform she had avoided wearing throughout this ordeal would now become her most powerful visual statement, her decades of earned authority lending weight to truths too long dismissed when spoken by those without institutional power. As she rehearsed key points with Naomi, Elise acknowledged the certainty that tomorrow's appearance would end her military career. But it would begin something potentially more important, a reckoning with systems of power that had operated too long without meaningful accountability. The television studio lights felt uncomfortably warm against Elise's face as she sat perfectly straight in her full dress uniform, ribbons and medals telling the story of 30 years' service to country across 3 combat zones and countless diplomatic missions. The decision to appear in uniform had transformed what network executives initially planned as a human interest segment into the lead story across all major news platforms, with competing networks rushing to provide contextual analysis of her decorated military career. The interview began with factual establishment of her identity and rank, the host visibly recalibrating his approach as the significance of her military position became clear. "Lieutenant General Daniels, your military record includes the Bronze Star with Valor, 2 Purple Hearts and presidential commendations for strategic innovations that revolutionized joint operations protocols. Why have you chosen to speak publicly about your experience with the Westridge Police Department?" Elise looked directly into the camera, her voice carrying the same command presence that had directed multinational military operations. "Because the uniform I wear represents a commitment to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What I experienced in Westridge reflects systemic failures that undermine constitutional protections for American citizens, particularly those in black communities. My oath of service doesn't end where my uniform comes off." The seismic shift in narrative was immediate and comprehensive. Within minutes of broadcast, Pentagon phones jammed with calls from congressional representatives, veteran organizations, and media outlets seeking official response. Military leadership found themselves in the unprecedented position of needing to publicly support a 3-star general while privately managing the institutional disruption her testimony created. The carefully scripted statement eventually released acknowledged General Daniels' distinguished service record and commitment to constitutional principles, while emphasizing that her television appearance was made in her personal capacity during approved leave. The calculated language fooled no one. The image of a lieutenant general in full-dress uniform describing police brutality she personally experienced created a cognitive dissonance impossible to resolve through bureaucratic terminology. Officers within the Westridge Police Department watched the interview with growing alarm, recognizing that Elise's military stature fundamentally changed the political calculations surrounding the case. By afternoon, 3 additional officers had contacted Naomi requesting meetings to provide evidence of systematic abuses, including documentation of quota systems targeting minority neighborhoods and training materials that encouraged aggressive escalation during encounters with black residents. The first officer to come forward, a 20-year veteran nearing retirement, explained his decision simply, "I served under General Daniels in Iraq. If she says this is about the Constitution, I believe her." The FBI investigation expanded to include Mayor Wilson and her business partners following disclosure of emails discussing how municipal zoning decisions correlated with intensified police activity in neighborhoods targeted for redevelopment. Financial records revealed property transfers following civil asset forfeitures that consistently benefited development companies connected to city leadership, creating a documented pattern of profit from aggressive policing in specific communities. Officer Keller, recognizing his increasing isolation as former supporters distanced themselves, attempted to flee jurisdiction but was intercepted by state police acting on federal information. His arrest at a bus station 50 miles outside, Westridge revealed both escape plans and documentation linking him to organized white supremacist groups, adding potential domestic terrorism connections to his growing legal challenges. Chief Monroe, facing mounting evidence of departmental corruption under his leadership, suffered a stress-induced cardiac event during an emergency meeting with city officials. His hospitalization created an administrative vacuum temporarily, filled by an interim chief from outside the department, disrupting established chains of command that had previously suppressed internal whistleblowers. Throughout these rapid developments, Elise applied military strategic planning methodologies to coordinate national response efforts, conducting virtual briefings with civil rights organizations across the country from her mother's living room, now transformed into an operations center. Her approach emphasized systems analysis rather than individual culpability, identifying structural weaknesses that enabled misconduct rather than focusing exclusively on removing specific bad actors. Replace individuals without changing systems, and you'll reproduce the same outcomes with different names, she explained during a strategy session with national organization leaders. This moment requires comprehensive restructuring of accountability mechanisms. Previously unreleased portions of Marcus's original video emerged through secured channels, showing even more egregious abuse than initially revealed. The additional footage, temporarily withheld on legal advice until broader evidence collection secured the case against tampering allegations, showed Officer Keller using explicit racial slurs during the assault and threatening to plant evidence if Elise continued questioning his authority. The expanded video eliminated any remaining public ambiguity about the racially motivated nature of the incident. Military veterans across racial and political spectrums organized solidarity rallies supporting Elise, creating unexpected alliances between groups normally divided by partisan politics. The shared experience of military service temporarily transcended other differences, with veterans organizations issuing joint statements demanding accountability and systemic reform. When those who defend our nation face the very injustices they risk their lives to prevent, we have failed as a society, read one particularly powerful statement signed by veteran advocacy groups spanning the political spectrum. The state governor, initially reluctant to involve higher authority in local matters, announced formation of a special investigation committee with subpoena power to examine Westridge governance structures following evidence that problems extended beyond the police department into multiple municipal agencies. The announcement came after polling showed overwhelming public support for intervention, creating political cover for action previously deemed too controversial. Mayor Wilson, recognizing her increasingly precarious position as investigations uncovered more extensive corruption than initially understood, approached federal prosecutors through intermediaries offering resignation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Her negotiating position weakened daily as additional evidence emerged, connecting her to systematic misconduct across multiple city departments. The offered immunity generating internal debate among prosecutors, weighing public accountability against expedient resolution. Corporate donors, previously reliable supporters of local politicians connected to the power structure, began withdrawing financial support as association with Westridge leadership became reputational liability. The business community's rapid recalculation of risk versus reward demonstrated how quickly entrenched power could unravel when supporting corruption became more costly than opposing it. This sudden corporate distancing created financial pressure that political consequences alone had failed to generate. As these transformative changes accelerated through systems previously resistant to reform, Elise made an unexpected visit to Officer Martinez's apartment, finding the young woman surrounded by packed boxes, preparing to leave the city where her police career had ended. "Jessica," Elise said after declining offered coffee, "I'd like you to consider an alternative to leaving." Martinez's expression reflected understandable skepticism. "What alternative exists? I've been blacklisted from law enforcement. My complaint. Record makes me unemployable." Elise handed her a folder containing preliminary documentation for a new state-level police standards commission being established through emergency legislative action. "They need someone with insider knowledge of how departments operate, someone with first-hand experience of the costs of speaking truth about misconduct." Martinez studied the materials with growing interest. "This would mean staying, facing the same people who destroyed my career." Elise nodded acknowledgement. "The hardest battles are often fought on familiar ground. Your choice, but I believe your experience makes you exceptionally qualified to ensure others don't face what you did." As Martinez considered this unexpected opportunity, developments continued accelerating across multiple fronts, creating momentum that transformed individual consequences into systemic recalibration. The turning point had arrived not through any single dramatic victory, but through the accumulated weight of strategic pressure applied simultaneously across institutional boundaries that had previously contained accountability within manageable parameters. What began as one officer's assault on one citizen had evolved into comprehensive examination of how power operated within and across systems designed to resist meaningful oversight, exactly as Elise had strategically envisioned. From the moment she chose silence about her rank, while facing Officer Keller's knee pressing between her shoulder blades. 6 months after Officer Ryan Keller pressed his knee into Lieutenant General Elise Daniels' back on Magnolia Lane, Westridge had undergone transformation that extended far beyond personnel changes into fundamental restructuring of governance, systems and accountability mechanisms. The newly established Civilian Oversight Board conducted its bi-weekly public meeting in the renovated community center, with Beatrice Daniels among the 7 board members reviewing body camera footage from recent police interactions and evaluating implementation of de-escalation protocols now required before any use of force. Officer Keller himself sat in state prison following conviction on multiple charges, including assault, civil rights violations, and conspiracy related to his connections with organized white supremacist groups. His 19-month sentencing hearing had featured testimony from 12 previously silent victims of similar treatment, their stories finally receiving judicial acknowledgement after years of dismissal by internal review processes designed to protect rather than scrutinize officer conduct. Former Mayor Wilson, having eventually secured limited immunity in exchange for comprehensive testimony about corruption networks extending beyond Westridge, provided prosecutors with documentation that initiated investigations in 7 additional jurisdictions where similar patterns of misconduct flourished beneath superficial accountability structures. The interconnected nature of these systems, once exposed, revealed how methodically civil rights protections had been circumvented through carefully maintained separation between official policies and operational practices. Elise herself had established the Daniels Accountability Foundation using her military pension as initial funding, creating an organization dedicated to developing standardized metrics for evaluating police practices and supporting communities implementing civilian oversight mechanisms. Despite multiple lucrative offers from private security firms and political action committees, she had chosen to focus on structural reform rather than personal advancement, applying her strategic expertise to developing models that could be replicated nationally. Marcus Washington, now 17 and preparing for college applications, had received both scholarship opportunities and internship positions with civil rights organizations, impressed by his courage in recording the original incident despite personal risk. His experience became central to youth engagement programs, educating teenagers about constitutional rights and civic responsibility, transforming personal trauma into educational opportunity for others facing similar situations. His mother, Lisa, had returned to her hospital position with promotion to department supervision, her employer's initially tentative support evolving into genuine recognition of her leadership capabilities demonstrated throughout the family's ordeal. Former officer Jessica Martinez, whose career seemed destroyed when she first came forward with evidence of departmental misconduct, now served as executive director for the state's newly established Police Standards Commission, her first-hand experience of retaliation against whistleblowers, informing development of protection mechanisms for officers reporting misconduct. Her testimony before the state legislature had proven instrumental in passing emergency reforms that standardized complaint procedures and created independent investigation requirements for excessive force allegations. The transformation extended into military spheres, where Elise's public stance had forced institutional reconsideration of how service members experiencing discrimination received support. The Army implemented new protocols requiring immediate response when military personnel reported civil rights violations, recognizing that previous policies had prioritized public relations concerns over member welfare. Training programs incorporated case studies based on Elise's experience, teaching officers at all levels to recognize their responsibilities when subordinates faced institutional discrimination in either military or civilian contexts. Elise's relationship with military colleagues who initially distanced themselves evolved gradually as institutional positions shifted, with several who had privately supported while publicly maintaining silence, eventually acknowledging their failure. To stand alongside her when doing so carried professional risk. These reconciliations occurred without recrimination, Elise recognizing that systems of power functioned precisely by making such calculations necessary for career survival. Naomi Jenkins' law practice had recovered and expanded, her role in the case establishing her as a leading civil rights attorney handling similar cases across multiple states. The legal precedents established through Westridge litigation provided frameworks for challenging qualified immunity protections that had previously shielded officers from accountability regardless of conduct severity. Her arguments before the Federal Appeals Court created new judicial interpretations that substantially narrowed immunity applications in cases involving clear constitutional violations. Beatrice Daniels' health had stabilized and improved as community support systems strengthened around her. Neighbors who once watched passively when police confronted her daughter now actively engaged in community safety initiatives that reduced reliance on armed response for non-violent situations. The street where the assault occurred had been transformed through community-led initiatives, with the previously neglected park at its center renovated through volunteer efforts and donations from residents committed to reclaiming public spaces. On a crisp autumn afternoon marking exactly 6 months since her television appearance in uniform, Elise visited this transformed location, now featuring playground equipment, community garden spaces, and a small plaza with benches where neighborhood meetings regularly occurred. As she sat watching children play, a young black girl approximately 9 years old approached with the direct curiosity of childhood. "Are you the lady from the video? The one who was a soldier?" Elise smiled, recognizing the simplification but appreciating the essential accuracy. "I was in the Army, yes, Lieutenant General Elise Daniels." The girl considered this information seriously. "My teacher showed us the video in civics class. She said you could have stopped it, but you didn't, so other people could be helped too." The observation demonstrated surprising insight from someone so young. "That's right. Sometimes being strong means making hard choices." The girl nodded with solemn understanding beyond her years. "I want to join the Army when I grow up. To be strong like you." Elise considered her response carefully, recognizing the responsibility inherent in shaping young aspirations. Strength comes in many forms. The uniform represented one kind of service, but what happened afterward represents another equally important kind. She gestured toward the community center across the street, its new sign reading, "Justice Through Accountability," above the entrance where residents entered freely for programs ranging from legal clinics to youth leadership training. True strength comes from changing systems, not just surviving them. Whatever path you choose, remember that's the most important mission. As they walked together toward the community center, Elise reflected on the journey from that moment of decision beneath Officer Keller's knee to this conversation with a child who would grow up in a community fundamentally different from the one that existed 6 months earlier. Systemic change remained incomplete, with much work still required to transform deeply embedded patterns of institutional behavior, but the direction of movement had unmistakably shifted from perpetual cycles of abuse and cover-up toward genuine accountability mechanisms with community participation. The personal costs had been substantial for everyone involved in creating this transformation, careers altered and lives temporarily destabilized, yet the alternative, silent acceptance of injustice as inevitable, represented costs even more, profound though less immediately visible. What's your take on this story of courage and transformation? Has watching Elise's journey inspired you to think differently about how individuals can challenge unjust systems? Comment below with your thoughts on what part of this story resonated most with you. If you believe more stories like this need to be told, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others who might find strength in Elise's example. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey from injustice to accountability. And remember that change begins with those brave enough to stand firm, even when standing alone. Lieutenant General Elise Daniels' story teaches us that true change requires strategic patience and calculated courage. When faced with injustice, the immediate emotional response might be to leverage whatever privilege or power we possess to escape the situation. However, Elise demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful action is to experience the system as others do, gathering evidence that exposes deeper patterns of corruption. The transformation of Westridge reveals how systems protect themselves through isolation, keeping incidents separate to disguise patterns. By connecting individual cases into a comprehensive challenge, Elise created accountability too broad to suppress. Her military background provided valuable lessons. Target systems rather than individuals, anticipate opposition tactics, and build coalitions across traditional boundaries. Perhaps most importantly, Elise showed that silence can be strength when strategically chosen. By withholding her rank initially, she revealed how the system treated ordinary citizens, creating irrefutable evidence that couldn't be dismissed as exceptional. True leadership sometimes means absorbing personal cost for collective benefit. The ripple effects of one person's principled stand created changes far beyond one police department, demonstrating how individual courage can catalyze institutional transformation when applied with strategic precision. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't immediate resistance, but patient, methodical dismantling of the systems that enable it. What would you do if faced with injustice? Would you use your privileges for immediate escape, or strategically expose the system like Elise did? Comment below with how this story might change your approach to confronting discrimination in your community. If you believe in the power of strategic patience and systemic change, hit that like button to support more stories of transformation. Subscribe to follow more journeys of courage against injustice, and share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand firm against racism and corruption. Remember, as Elise taught us, sometimes the strongest action isn't the most obvious. 1. Thank you for witnessing this powerful journey from individual assault to nationwide accountability, and may we all find the courage to challenge unjust systems when we encounter them.